Welcome back. So, I am really looking forward to a great conversation today. I want to introduce you to Becky Sampson. So, she is the founder of a company called Only Subpoenas. And so, we are going to be diving into a conversation today a little bit about what are they, how do they work, and why might you want to consider one.
Mhm.
So, Becky, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I always love being a guest a lot more. It's a little bit easier than hosting.
Oh, exactly. Well, so let's go ahead and kick it off. So I know that a lot of times when people are going through my bridge program, one of the things that we talk about is identifying gaps in information, gaps in transparency, gaps in income. And so when you and I connected, I was like, oh my goodness, this fits perfectly into our bridge method, right? As
Mhm.
far as identifying those gaps. So first of all, let's start with what is a subpoena? And then I know we have a little bit of your story and background on why you're doing it, but let's just kick off with the why is it, what is it?
So interesting good question. So first of all, I always start off with that I'm not an attorney. I'm not a licensed professional. I just share what I have learned about subpoenas and what I do for attorneys when I'm doing that. So a subpoena is a court order. So a lot of times people get mistaken thinking in discovery. I had one person tell me they were talking to me about wanting a subpoena and they're like, well, my husband, how's he going to be able to get all that information back within 2 weeks? I said, no, 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 no. This is not a discovery request. Okay, that's usually what you start with in a thing, but if they aren't giving you what you need and or they're giving you parts of what you need and then you need the rest of it, you just go subpoena. I always say stop asking for permission and just go get what you need. So a subpoena is a court order, and there's only two ways in order for a subpoena to be enforceable. One, if you are not represented by an attorney, it would be through the court. The court would be the one who signs the subpoena. Versus if you're working with an attorney, the attorneys have rights to sign that subpoena. And that subpoena goes out to the organization or the people, or if you're subpoenaing someone to come testify. Mostly I work with more documents that people are searching for and they aren't getting back, like bank records or employment records, or it could be records from therapists when they're working with children in children cases. There's a whole bunch of things. One thing that you can't subpoena is the IRS, but pretty much everybody else you can pretty much subpoena. So it's a court order that they have to be compliant with. When they send it out to the bank usually has 2 weeks or whatever amount of time you allow them to get that information back to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think a lot of times, right, people, to your point, they'll say, well, I've heard attorneys say, I don't want a subpoena because I feel like that's an aggressive move.
Mm.
And when you and I talked, I'm like, okay, to some extent, I kind of understand that. And yet I don't because I just feel like, I mean, how many times are we going to ask? At some point, you just got to go get the information.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened to me in my case when I was going through my divorce. And it was a long, drawn out case. I remember that the only reason why I knew how to do a subpoena was I was representing myself and my ex-husband's attorney sent me a subpoena for my bank record. I knew exactly what he was looking for. So I was like, why didn't you just ask for it? So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's more of aggressive because at that point he hadn't even asked me for that. I would have given it to him within 24 hours of him sending me a subpoena regarding it or sending me the notification of the subpoena. I had it back in his possession with it highlighted and notated. I was like, I know this is what you're looking for. Here you go. I have nothing to hide. And so I was working with an attorney at that point, meaning like he was just mentoring me. I didn't have anybody. And he goes, well, there you go, Becky. There's your subpoena. There's your template. Go ahead. You know how to do it. So he kind of walked me through the process. I didn't know that I had the ability as a pro se or a self litigate person to do it myself, but I did. That was one of 21 subpoenas that I ended up serving in my case.
I find that so interesting because I think a lot of times, to your point, like people ask, right, as part of that discovery process, but where people get tripped up is like they ask and then they ask and then they ask and they
Yeah.
expect. And I always say it's like bad parenting. Like at some point, if there's no consequence, you just keep asking and they keep ignoring you or engaging what I call the dam method, which is they dodge the disclosure, they avoid getting assets valued, and they misrepresent information. And at some point, then women in particular, right? Because that's my audience, is like, hey, I've got to make a decision, but I don't feel like I have all the information. And so again, we've got this big giant gap. And so this just can help close the gap. So we've talked about what it is and potentially why, right? Closing the gap in information so that ultimately women can make good decisions. Because once we have the information, of course, then it's what do we do with it? That's a whole separate conversation. But talk to us a little bit about from your perspective when you issued the subpoenas for your divorce. Tell us a little bit about that.
So here's the thing is I had no idea about the legal system. I've been married and divorced twice. So my first marriage was nothing like this. I mean, we literally signed with a notary and we're done. The second one was incredibly difficult because 21 hearings, 21 subpoenas, 3.5 years court case, all so that he would have to pay me zero, which I was like, well, that's not an option. So I learned very quickly. I mean, I made the mistake that most people make, right? Is exactly what you just said, is you ask for nicely, here's the information I need in order to settle. And then, of course, the court ordered us to go to mediation. But I kept saying to the mediator, I don't have all the information that I need in order to settle for a fair and equitable division. And so that was another $3,500 that was wasted. Now, luckily, had to pay that. But I realized early on, I kept asking and then motion to comply. And then we go back to court. And then the judge would say, yes, Mr. So-and-so, you need to give her that information. And then I would do another discovery request back to court again. And, if you have an attorney, that's incredibly expensive. So then it was about 8 months into my case where I'm like, all right, once I learned how to do the subpoena, I was like, I stopped asking for permission for this information and I just went and got it. And I have to say that was a game changer for me because now I have all this information and you kind of touched in that is that what do you do with all this information? Well, I've now learned through this process, I'm really into research. So it was like Christmas Day when those subpoenas would come back. And I had a little printer that, man, I worked that thing to death. I printed every single one of those because I was living in Hawaii. I didn't want them to send me, and it's very expensive to send me all the documents. So I would always have them send it to me just electronically. I'd be able to go through and then print whatever I wanted. But I was one of those people, I printed every single thing, got a highlighter out like this, and I went to work. I mean, on one of my podcasts, I was talking to an attorney that actually really likes it when their clients do a lot of the forensics because who knows the case better? Like who knows what's not right in that bank account or who knows where, and it really gave me confidence. I ended up gaining a lot of confidence because I was in a marriage where I wasn't allowed to see any of that. Even though it was a short marriage, I still needed to see all the data in order to go and make an educated decision in front of the judge. And it just took so long. That's why we did so many subpoenas because, it goes 6 months and I'm like, all right, I need the updated information. So subpoenas can be used as a really, really good tool to just go out there and get it. And within a couple of weeks, you'll be able to get all the information. There's no hiding. There's no like this document and not that document. You get all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I have referred to over the years as Aaron Brockovich moments, right? Where
Yes.
we've done those. We've done the party where it's like, hey, it's the client and me, and she maybe has two friends, and we're highlighting. And my job was to look at like cash withdrawals from the ATM. Okay, so then you're going through, and I'm yellow. Okay, then they're orange, and like then you're passing the
Yes.
paperwork around. I mean, it was crazy. And now, I mean, there's a lot of like things that we do for our clients that are electronic and faster
Oh,
and
way faster now.
way faster, right? But the concept is we got to get a handle on because the reality of it is too, Becky, like just having more information, it's like that actually sometimes can create an opportunity for people to freeze or get overwhelmed or you don't know what you're
Mm,
looking at or how you should be looking at it. And I think the massive amounts of information that can come out of this, we got to get it organized. We got
yep.
to then analyze it. We got to figure out how does this fit into, the overall strategy because there are plenty of times when people will ask for information and maybe it's not directly coming from a subpoena, most likely because they just I mean, I've gotten those files, thousands of
Oh,
pages,
yeah.
and you're just scrolling through and you're like, what do I even do with half of this, right?
Well, so this is what I say to people, Rhonda. Again, I'm not an attorney. This is just my strategy that I used for myself is I was in a situation where I had to do a lot of defending of who I am and the worth that I brought to the table. So when I look at that, if I'm going to strategize in a marriage, I need to know what information do I need, okay, to build my case within the court. Where is that information? Who holds that information? And how quickly can I get it?
Yeah.
So sometimes people will be like I have one gal right now that's called me for a subpoena, and it may or may not be a phishing. So phishing is something that you're like, I just want this information because I want to know for my case, versus you need that information in order to make an educated decision.
Yeah.
So it is
Yeah.
all strategy. And like yourself, someone like yourself or an attorney can sit down and go, okay, look, this is what we need in order to get you through the finish line. You might get more. And you also might do a subpoena and it will open up a whole nother, like, oh, I didn't know about that bank account. I didn't know about
Yep.
that crypto account. I didn't know about that. And so doing one subpoena might open up another case. But for me, binders is how I did it. I have 10 binders sitting there in this closet right here that got shipped from Hawaii just a month or two ago because that's how I organized it. I would get a
Yeah.
binder and then I would do tabs. And I
Yep.
remember in the middle of my case, once I eventually had an attorney, I was on the mainland and he was in Hawaii, and he called me, he goes, Becky, where's that one document? And I said, like the second or third tab back in the orange this. And he's like, oh, you're so organized. So that's what I say is that organization is absolutely key because believe you me, especially if you're representing yourself in front of a court, you lose your brain and you need to have it all organized so you can go, oh, this is what I have. This is what I
Yep.
have. And so hopefully it doesn't get that case, but for you and your own peace of mind, get that information organized and in a place where it's easily accessible, and then highlight and then start making a directory of like, okay, here's this and this is on this page. Here's this and here's just like you're doing exhibits for the court,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you can get a million pages, but you're only going to be using one or two pages because that's where the evidence is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the other part of that too that you mentioned is the scope. Like exactly what are we looking for? And I think to your point, like a lot of times when people are doing this on the forensic side in particular, they're like, we need all the documents. Well, what is all the documents? And so
Right.
there's like this overarching request for documentation that then doesn't get produced, that then ultimately ends up without a final kind of summary, no report, and a bunch of money that's wasted. And so
Exactly.
like I was working with a client recently, and we were going through some of the bank statements, and there wasn't necessarily any like while she had been involved in a lot of the financials, there wasn't a big giant concern
Mm-hmm.
about lost or hidden wasted money.
Mm-hmm.
But again, she didn't know what she didn't know, right? So we're going through there and I was like, hey, what is this? And she was like, I don't know. So I looked, I'm like, oh, we'll just do a little Google search on what this is. And I'm like, this is gambling winnings. I said, did you know he gambles? And she's like, no. I'm like, well,
You do now.
usually when there's you do now, and normally and normally when there's money coming in, that means that there's money going out. And
Yep.
so now you have a reason to maybe ask additional questions or get additional statements for that one account. I think sometimes we're like, well, I need every statement from every account. It just becomes too much of a mountain.
Right.
And you just end up spending so much time and money and energy. But now we've got enough, like, let's start there. And then you look at those statements, and then if there's a statement, something in there that we notice that maybe there's money going out to somewhere else, you kind of have to take it a little bit of a step at a time sometimes and just follow the clues.
Yes. Believe it or not, I've actually had several people reach out to me recently about gambling money and subpoenaing the actual casinos. And it is
Yep.
possible.
Yep.
You'll get
It
the
is possible.
records. Yeah, you'll get the
It is
records, you'll get
possible.
the proof. But again, it's all strategy. It's like, do you need that information? Do you need it or do you want it? Right? Because sometimes people go after information that they want, but not necessarily is going to be beneficial for what you need for your case.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you want to know that he's spending all this time down there? And do you want to know that he spent this much time and spent money on some other woman or whatever it is? But is that going to help or hurt your case? So it's be very strategic about what you are looking for and
Yeah.
making sure that it really supporting your case and not hurting it. Because
Yeah.
that happens. And judges don't
Absolutely.
like that.
Absolutely. And I think, again, the strategy is super important, right?
Mhm.
Because, again, like dialing in, the tighter that we can make that scope of what we're looking for, I believe the more efficient it is, right? And
Mhm.
so, but the gambling piece, I did one podcast interview um, on gambling, and I actually had somebody who is licensed to help facilitate people through that addiction. And it is. We have actually subpoenaed casinos over the years
Yep.
and found information that was then helpful. And the question then really is, okay, does your state look at, gambling or pornography or whatever as it relates to that as marital waste. And if they do, then how do we best, kind of cue that up? But my role in that, right, is okay, once the subpoenas come back and it's like, okay, now how does that fit into the financial picture? And do we have some leverage here as part of, the negotiating while relying on sometimes the attorneys to tell us what does the law say in your particular state?
Exactly. And you just mentioned something. I mean, sometimes it is marital waste, right? Let's say there's 20 million or $20,000 that was just gambled away. That again, you do want to consult your attorney because your attorney will let you know how that state sees it. But a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, he just spent $10,000, $20,000 and I have no control over it. I'm like, okay, breathe, hold on just 1 second. Go and check your statute in your specific state and see how they use that because that could be leverage. I remember I learned about marital waste and I subpoenaed a place that sells guns and he had just bought a $5,000 gun. And I'm like, what? And they had no idea how to deal with a subpoena because they don't have very many people subpoenaing them. And I was just like, well, I need to
Mhm.
prove that marital waste, that's part of what I was doing was that you're spending all this money on things that you shouldn't be spending when you're under a financial restraining order. So yes, that was one of the places that I subpoenaed. And
Yeah,
sometimes you don't only, now, let me just tell you one more thing that I did. In my case, the reason why I think I won my case was that I gathered all this information preparing for trial. Now, 97% of cases never go to trial, even though you say, yes, I'm sure mine's going to go to trial. You know what I mean? But I settled he gave me a settlement agreement within 5, 10 minutes into going to trial that day. But one of the things is it created leverage. There was no more hiding. And I always say to people is that subpoenas uncover everything. Just because they're trying to hide things doesn't mean that they're hidden. You just need to know where to look. And then when you have it all on the table, that for me, in my case, created leverage in order for him to settle. But I
yeah,
also like to tell people just because they settle for something in an agreement doesn't mean they usually will pay
yeah,
because it took me another year and a half through the court system and everything to finally get him to pay the settlement that he agreed on. And so
yeah,
if they're having a difficult time getting discovery and a difficult time getting to settlement, it may not be the end. I mean, I don't say that to scare people, but I'm just saying, think ahead.
yeah,
Okay, so what if he doesn't pay? How am I
yeah.
still being able to provide for myself?
That's
Right?
right. That's right. Yeah,
Yes.
and I think, one thing that I just wanted to mention really quickly on the marital waste conversation is I think a lot of times people are like, oh, he's spending all this money, blah, blah, blah. And yet I think at the end of the day, it is often, like in the 10 years that I've been doing this, I think there's been maybe two times that we've actually got it accounted for on the balance sheet. So
Mm,
it is a challenging uphill battle. I think there are some technology and some things that now make it a little bit easier to be able to do that, but it's not a slam dunk. And so
yeah.
I think, again, having that strategy, asking the right questions was super helpful. So,
Getting on it quickly, right? Don't let
yeah,
things like go. I know a case right now, 8 months, and he hasn't been compliant. And I'm going, why did you not within the 2 weeks or even a month put a motion in? Let's get it done. But
yeah. I think with that, it's because people are like, well, it's going to take them time to gather it and whatever. And each state has a time period in which they usually are asking.
yeah.
Like for me here in Wisconsin, they have 90 days to
Mm,
actually provide that information. And the problem though is the 90 days comes and goes, and what's the accountability? And so then they just
exactly.
continue to kick the can down the road, and it becomes challenging to get that information. So, you
You
know,
just brought up a really good point. You need to know what your jurisdiction is. You need to
yep.
know what your statute is for your jurisdiction, for your area,
Mhm.
because that plays into the strategy.
There are states that I've worked in too where they don't require a financial disclosure statement. Like, okay, so how are we, like, there's no timelines, there's no formal way to like gather information. It's absolutely insane. Because I
Mm,
think that the mindset is, well, he's going to have to provide it. Okay, and what if he doesn't?
exactly.
And so it just becomes really challenging. And so I know we've talked about what it is, right, and why it
Mhm.
might be important, right, to kind of close that gap. But let's just spend a couple minutes talking about how. Let's talk about the how. How does this work?
Again, I'm not the attorney,
Yeah,
so I can't explain exactly how they work other than if you feel like it's something that you need in your case. Let's just start with if you're pro se. There's a lot of free resources out there in every single state. that you can call, usually legal aid. If you'll call them and say, hey, I need to do a subpoena, can you walk me through it? How can I do it? There's a lot of AI stuff out there now that you can draft up your own subpoena and then go and get legal advice on how to do it properly, whether it's through the free legal aid or whether it's through other organizations that can help support you on that. Or if there's an attorney like I did, my attorney was, not the one I actually had during my divorce, but the one that was mentoring me. He was a legal aid. He says, Becky, I don't have enough time to really, really help you. I said, look, if you'll be willing to mentor me and tell me, hey, this is right, this is not right. And he was fantastic because he was like, you need to make sure you do this, this, and this. And there are attorneys out there that help people pro se, but they also give you guidance instead of being there as someone that's retained. So they can teach you how to do that. And every jurisdiction's different. Even if I were to tell you how I did it in Hawaii, that doesn't mean that that's how it's done in your jurisdiction. But typically you have to go to the court and the court has to issue that subpoena. So that's if you're pro se. If you're working with an attorney, the attorney knows typically how to do that. Now that's where I come in. A lot of times if you're getting subpoenas across state lines, there's a lot of red tape that you have to go through. And I happen to specialize in that because most of the subpoenas that I did were across state lines. They were not in Hawaii. They were on the mainland. And I remember when I turned my case over to my attorney, he's like, Becky, how did you get all these foreign subpoenas back? And I'm like, what are you talking about? What's a foreign subpoena? Like, I had no idea what that meant. Foreign means foreign jurisdiction across state lines. So now I actually know and specialize in that. And a lot of attorneys struggle with that because it's just, there's a lot of nuanced stuff. And so when they work with me, I make sure it goes through 100% or they don't pay me. That's how confident I am that now every jurisdiction is a little different. So there's a lot of research on my end in order to make sure that it goes through, because my thing is that I want you to have the right paperwork so that you have what you need in order to settle for a fair and equitable division. So the how on that, the attorney will know. If it's a foreign or across state lines, then I help support them on that.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening and they're, working with an attorney, are they basically encouraging their attorney to connect with you, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's tough for me because I have a difficult thing where if the people going through the divorce end up reaching out to me first, now I would say, yes, it sounds like you need subpoenas, but really the sooner they can get me engaged with their attorney to talk to them about that and how I can support that, that's better than having the person going through the divorce have to try to explain it to their attorney. Because I'm really just there as a support. My job is just to make sure you get the paperwork back.
Yeah, absolutely. And an administrative component that maybe if the attorneys aren't feeling like A, they have the time to do, or B, we have seen it where there are counts that are maybe not in that state and they're like, well, we're not going to do that,
I
right? Or
know.
we can't do that. And so it does kind of help bridge that gap and hopefully expedite that process of getting information if they have somebody who can kind of manage that process.
Well, absolutely. And I say all the time, look, attorneys and paralegals can draft up subpoenas. Should they be doing them? They are very detailed. And 1 out of every 3 subpoenas statistically gets rejected, even out of attorneys' offices. And so why waste the time and the energy? So just because they can do it doesn't mean that they have the time and the ability to do the detailed work to make sure that they're going to get accepted. And my thing is I don't know about you, Rhonda, I don't like to do things and then have to redo them again. Plus I don't think most people want to pay for that either. So that's where I come in, is let's do it right the first time so that you can quickly get the information back.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're going to put your contact information in the show notes. I want to thank you for your time. As we wrap up, share kind of a final takeaway, thought, word of encouragement for our listeners here today.
When people ask me that kind of question, I truly believe that every single one of us matters. And in my divorce, this last divorce that I had, that really helped me to gain my confidence in myself. My husband at that point had turned to me and said, Becky, I'm having a really hard time seeing the value that you bring to my life. And I turned to him and I said, here's the good news. And I don't know where this came from, but it was a burst of courage. And I said, here's the good news. I know the value that I bring to your life. So oftentimes as women, especially if we're in toxic relationships, we don't feel like we deserve to advocate for ourselves financially, especially if we were not the main breadwinner. So my last thing to say is that every single person matters, and men matter too, right? Things happen to men as well. But I would say 44% of women coming out of divorce end up in financial poverty. And I always say, not on my watch. And mainly it's because they don't understand their rights and they don't know how to advocate legally for those rights. And I truly, truly believe that that's the reason why I won my case. And it felt so good to know. And I love to share that message is that, look, I'm not saying it's easy. It is not easy, but having the right people on your
Yeah.
team and to support you, you matter. You are
Mm,
financially just as important as they are. And
okay.
so advocate for yourself and your kids so you can move
Mm.
forward stronger.
I
Yeah.
love that. Well, I am so glad that you were able to join me today. And like
Thank
I said,
you.
we'll put your contact information in the show notes. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Becky if you want to learn a little bit more about Only Subpoenas.
Thank you so much, Rhonda.